everyone. I'm not a huge public speaker, so forgive me if I seem a little nervous. I just have a love for these women. I don't have any PhDs or degrees, but I have a huge love of heritage. And I've been a volunteer with the Scéal District Heritage Group now since 2016. I'll just move this little thing over here a little bit. So as Donna said there, I work in maternity as a HCA in Portiuncula in Ballinasloe. I do see firsthand all the work the women do, but I also have a history in our family of midwifery. And a few little things came to me over the years, I'd say over the last 7 to 10 years, of different things coming together. So I decided in 2020 during COVID to research, and I found that there was very little written on all of these brilliant women. But for me, I love the holistic approach. So a lot of academics, and they have their place because they do wonderful work. It's pages and pages of writing. I'm not that person. I love to know about the person, who they are, what they worked at. And each midwifery bag has its own story. And you'd be amazed at what stories are out there. I've even gotten one this week, that the midwife who delivered Charlie Haughey in Castlebar. So I'm going to go and record that lady now in a couple of weeks. So it's just amazing what is out there. So I'm a mother of 6 myself, and I work full time. And I believe an awful lot of our heritage is in our community. If you just go and walk, it's a lot time consuming, and it's an awful lot of work, walking, footwork, moving around each village, going to talk to people. But it's just amazing what you'll find when you get there and what people are willing to talk about. Even some of these women were highly involved during the War of Independence, which I'm only tipping on now at the minute. We had one lady, and she was fond of hiding the ammunition when she was going around, because they didn't suspect her because she was out at night time. You see, they thought she was at delivery, so she wasn't a suspect of carrying ammunition around the place. So I'm going to dive into that. I have a phase 2 coming up on it. So I'll just move this little fella along. So the Handywomen. So as Donna said, every town and village in the country had Handywomen. And for us in East Galway, I'm originally from Drogheda, and I moved, of course, love brings you all sorts of directions, but anyway, I'm down in Galway now. And in East Galway is where I'm situated. So in East Galway, we had a woman, Ma Kilcummins, and she was practicing right up until the 1970s. Even though it was outlawed in 1918, but didn't come into practice, I think, until 1931. But there's an awful lot of newspaper reports about these women, that they needed to be outlawed. And yet there's reports from doctors saying they would rather have a good handywoman than a bad nurse. So there was an awful lot of friction. But the one thing that stayed true for these handywomen was their level of community. The women trusted them. They knew their mother used them, their aunt used them, their sister used them, and they had great trust in them. And there was a massive trust in this lady, Ma Kilcummins. Her husband was known as Ma, they were known as Ma and Pa. And they never had any family of their own. But she was scrupulously clean. And I think that's what stood to her, because she had very little cross-contamination with infection. So she had a huge record for delivering babies and keeping mother and baby safe and well. So they learned their skills really before. There would have been an aunt or a mother or maybe a local midwife or whoever was in the village that they took a shine to. And they would have learned their skills, which is still a skill today really. And I feel a lot of the community has been taken away from the women, because I see the women coming in now and they're so anxious because they see a different face every time they go into the maternity. So there's nothing familiar about it anymore. It's even more hidden now than it ever was. So they've no idea what's coming to them. Whereas years ago, you would have heard your sister, you would have heard your mother, you would have seen all what went through at home, because you're in a very small environment. So you would have known exactly what went on. So in Portiuncula at the minute now, they have a midwifery clinic for the last couple of years, which has turned out to be a huge success. So the women have that familiar face. They know their midwife. The home birth is on the rise again. And it's lovely to see it. I have 2 colleagues. One I work with closely, Aisling Dixon, and she has a massive amount of home birthing work, and she's a real advocate for women. So I'll move on to the next little one now. There's Ma now in all her glory. This was taken by Marie Gilmore, and she is actually, this was given to me, by Marie Gilmore. This is her as a baby. So Ma delivered her, and she was her godmother. And she was one of the last deliveries. She was in the 60s. But it's amazing to think that they were still going right up until the 1970s. Like Ireland, rural Ireland was still very rural at that time. As I said, she was ma and pa, and we'd say about OCD today is what she would have had, because she was scrupulously clean. But huge community trust in ma, and she was very well loved. And like, she's dead 40 years, and the amount of people that still remember her locally is unbelievable. So this lady is, she's actually my children's, on their dad's side, granny's grandmother. So she's the great-great-grandmother, and she's Mrs. Mary Ann Fanning. And this lady was born in Skerries in County Dublin in 1880. And she went on to be a midwife in 1898 and got her first post down in Kerry. But she stayed there for a couple of years, and until a post came up more local for her, which was Garristown, where she was living then. At the time she got the dispensary there. And she then met her husband. But before she married him, she wrote a letter to the chairman of the board in 1901 asking permission to keep her position. So you have to remember, this time women hadn't a vote. They were just told that if they got married, that was it. But these women are real go-getters. They were just so inspiring. They stuck to their guns. They loved books. They loved education, and they loved their women. That was a really big thing with the whole contrast across the whole board. They absolutely loved their women and their babies. So she just didn't do the midwifery now, this lady. She got to keep her position anyway, that's the main thing. But she was a real entrepreneur. She also, her husband died when he was a bit older than her, I think, but she was a very young woman left with 7 or 8 children at the time. And he passed away. So she decided then that she'd build a glass house, which wasn't a big thing, a big done thing at that time. And she built the glass house and grew vegetables with the likes of broccoli, tomatoes, stuff that you wouldn't get in the 1900s on a regular basis. And she was getting up on £700, £800 a week for her vegetables, selling them into the Dublin market for the aristocracy. So she was able to build her farm as well as her midwifery, and make a life for her and her children. And she built her farm up so much that she was able to give each of her sons a farm when she was finished. She was a whirlwind. She was something else. And not alone that, this is her little bag here now. So this is 125 years old, this little bag. And I've just pulled out some of the little bits in it. And it was part of the 1916 Rising as well. So she was one of the first to render medical aid to the Thomas Ashe volunteers down in Ashbourne, and helped them nurse them and their wounds and bullet wounds and whatever else was going on the day, while she had a 3-month-old son at home. But there were some great stories about these women when they'd go off to work. They'd be gone for 2-3 days, even sometimes up to a week, depending on what was going on. But the older ones used to look after the younger ones. And I know in this particular family anyway, the older ones decided it would be a lot simpler if you had them dressed for school the night before, with their lunch in the bag, and they put the bag all in the back and into the bed. They used to roll out the next morning and head off to school, the poor creatures. But this is why I just love visiting people. There's so many wonderful stories about them. And even when she passed, her grandchildren adored her. She died in 1964. They can't remember what white flower it was. They did think it was snowdrops, but it was April time, so I said it couldn't really be snowdrops, but some small white flower, and they put them all inside the little coffin all around her, as they didn't want to see her go. So she was a wonderful woman, and you're welcome to have a look at this little bagging when the time comes. So there's her little bag as well, and her little certificate. So she was this little certificate here was one of I've gotten a second one now from Mayo. It's one of the first certificates from 1920 to certify that you can practice midwifery. So at the time, with the outlaws and the 1918 Midwifery Act, you had to have one of these, or you would be, I suppose you'd get a fine or jail sentence or whatever it was at the time. But you can still see it's under George V, I think it is up there. It's still under British rule, because we didn't effectively get over until the 1920s. But it's a wonderful thing to have, and it's immaculate, and I have a photocopy of it down there for anyone that wants to have a look. I have a little table of a few of her items down there as well. So this is her obituary, which the family have the original newspaper for, and it does state on it, if you can see it here, that she was with the Thomas Ashe and the other volunteers that took part in the Battle of Rath near Ashbourne, which is a great thing for them because you always get family folklore, but you never have much in print from that time. So they're very lucky to actually have that. And that's the little letter here I was telling you about, seeking permission from the chairman of the board. So this was her copy. You know the way you do a copy here and then you'd write it out properly. So we're lucky we have the copy here. And she was still under her maiden name, Mrs. Halligan. Well, there was one other bit of devilment here as well I forgot to tell you about. So this little letter here is from 1945, and Sean Lamass originally was part of it, I think. He had stopped her petrol allowance during the 40s. That was kind of wartime, because she was shifting lads around the place that she shouldn't be shifting around. It was only supposed to be for it was only supposed to be petrol allowance for her midwifery only, but she was bringing farmers here, there and everywhere, and anything that had to be done was in the care. So she got it back anyway. So I wish to inform you, Minister has the decision to review and has decided to issue permits and petrol allowances to you in respect to the above mentioned. So we have the little vehicle registration number as well, and I think it was a Mini Ford or something it was called in the little car, which was a big thing having a car at that time because most of the women were on bikes, but she was North Dublin, so there would have been a bigger population, I suppose, to be looking after. This lovely lady is Bina Kelly. And from being in work, I've had so many people talk to me about Bina and her kindness. And kindness seems to be a huge word that's used throughout all of these women with their midwifery skills and how much time and compassion they give to their women. So Bina was recorded, lucky enough, with the Looking West, you know, the Jim Fahey, some of you might remember the Jim Fahey show from that. And he recorded Bina in 1983, I think. And he had a full 2-hour interview, but it was whittled down to a half an hour. And all these things, I have a little postcard down there, and if you scan the back of it, it'll bring you to the website to all of these full interviews and podcasts if you want to listen to them. But Bina talks about her mother and herself were doing midwifery from 1890 up until about 1970, which is 80 years of midwifery. She never married, so this was her whole world. Bina worked with the blue bloods, as she called them, the big aristocracies, right down to the traveller camps. She absolutely loved the traveller women at that time, and she used to bring them to her own home and demonstrate bathing the babies and showing them how to feed. And she used to give them an awful lot of time, because she said the hardship that women had at that time was even harder on the traveller women because they had no support. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. So they're all known as Bina's babies, and children that time all believed that Bina had the baby in the bag, and so when she'd go into the house, the baby would just appear out of the bag, and if you wanted one, you better get yourself Bina down with her little bag. But anyway, someone was having a baby, one of the stories her niece told me, and next door wanted one, so the bag got stolen. So they were a bit disappointed when there was no baby in the bag, but they couldn't record. The Gardaí and everyone were out looking for this bag. But as she said, all her instruments and everything, it was so expensive to go and buy these items at the time. So there was a huge effort out to have a look for buying his little bag. But I had one girl work with me. She's now retired, and her mother suffered what was now a postnatal depression. And she said with each baby that came, it progressively got worse, so that she did end up in a mental institution for a short time. But when she came home, Bina called to her every day, every single day until them children were up, to care for her and make sure that she didn't have a relapse. And she would cook a dinner, or she would take the children away for a little while, bring them. The biggest memory, of course, this lady had was Bina bringing little sweets in her bag, because they wouldn't have had it. So she said, we would never have had our mother for as good and as long as we did, only for the care that Bina Kelly gave. And this again is the kindness that it keeps coming up through all these women. But she did witness an awful lot of things for women when she went into the house. So she would have seen the poverty and the hardship that these women were going on and delivering babies year on year. And she speaks about what she sees when she goes in the room, and her little fears of what was coming to her as she entered, as they've no backup. They might have a local doctor, which a lot of times was an alcoholic at the time, which I'm constantly reading. And so they must have had the fear of God in them, looking at these faces. But I was blessed because I hadn't got a photo of Bina, and of course social media is just brilliant these days. So I put a request out to get a picture, and she's here with her brother Jack. She was supposed to be just a tiny, tiny little woman, but a firecracker, and loved her fags and her little bit of gin at the night time afterwards. So here we have lovely Kathleen Ward. So Kathleen is a traveller lady, she's 92. And in the interview now, she's hard of hearing, so her daughter was doing a bit of shouting in it. If you could pass by that, you'll get loads of information from Kathleen. So Kathleen spoke about how it was for the traveller women that time, and the fears that they had. They generally hadn't anybody to help them deliver. They were lucky if there was an older woman there with them when they were moving around to help them with the birth. So I asked her, what did she have? And she said her trust in God and her faith. And they have a massive amount of superstitions around birth and christenings and all of that. So a big thing with them, with superstitions, I had a few of them written out now, and I've left all my bits and bobs at home, as you do with nerves. But anyway, one or two of them is when you go into, say one is if you go in a graveyard when you're pregnant, you get the baby will have a crooked foot, like, and all these kind of old things, pishopes. But the old tradition of lay baptising, so we're doing a lot of work now as a heritage group on killings. I don't know if any of you know what the killings are, is where anyone that was not baptised or unmarried mother or suicide or a beggar man on the road or whatever, they were all put into these killings because they couldn't be put into consecrated ground. But it was different for the traveller people. And I suppose there was some superstitions around traveller people. The people were afraid that time that they might get a curse as well, you see. So they did a lay baptising, they called it. So they put holy oil into the baby that they called deadborn, we'd call stillborn. They put holy oil into the baby, do the prayers, the priest would come, and that child would be buried in consecrated ground at all times, and be laid out on a little white cloth. So they used an awful lot of traditional medicines, and one of them would be sphagnum moss. And that grows kind of, I was ahead of myself, I have a few of them up there I'd forgotten about. But I had the sphagnum moss anyway, was used to stop bleeding. And they'd use that when a woman would be after having the baby to help if there was a bit of a bleed. They would use the sphagnum moss from the side of the road. And there is now healing properties in it. There's an antibiotic, a natural antibiotic in it. And it's all been tested and proved as that it could do all that kind of stuff for you, which is amazing, really. But you can see some of these are from the Duchess School collection, and they kind of repeat everything that the traveller woman had told me. And that's a great resource for anyone that wants to look it up, Duchess 93. It's a school's collection that that the government did in 1937 to collect all the old stories and knowledge from local areas through school children. So they had to be between age of 10 and 12 in 1937. But you'd see there now, you can't enter a dead house, put salt under the mother's pillow when the nurse takes the baby to get christened, so the fairies don't take the mother while she's away. So that would be probably like postnatal depression now, that they thought. It'd be similar to why they dress boys in dresses. Autism was highly more in boys than girls at that time. And even now I think there's, but it's girls, you have to kind of more test them to see it because they mask it a lot better. But they used to dress the boys in skirts because they were fully convinced that the fairies would take them. So this is another lovely lady, Mary Kate Jennings. So she worked from Ballinasloe, but Mary Kate became an orphan when she was 17. And she went over to London in 1939 by herself into a digs they were awful brave, only kids heading off over there into a war zone to train as a nurse. When she got there, she was hit by shrapnel and bombed at one stage, and there was a full, I'll just bring it up here for you first, there was a full, you can see it here, newspaper clipping of her, and it says nurse's nurse. So this is her here in the bed. She was only 18 years old, and you can imagine the fear of all them noises of the sirens and bombs and everything, how it must have felt to her at the time. But she trained over in London, and she even managed to get herself a driving licence to drive the ambulances around during the war and help rescue people as well. But it wasn't really her midwifery she used until she came home and got a community position here and had her own family. I'll go back over here now. So yeah, she featured in a lot of the thing. But the Jennings family anyway, I had a contact from work on how I got Mary Kate. The Jennings family have kept her midwifery bag as well, and it is, when I say immaculate, there isn't a scratch on it. Books are immaculate. Their mother kept it. They said they weren't allowed to touch it. They'd be dead if they put their finger anywhere near it. That they only really got to see it in the last few years after she passed. So this bag, we're hoping might get into a museum as well. We're in talks with the family. But when I say there's books reference books, all her little recordings of her women and how the delivery went, how all that went for her. It's just fascinating to read all these kind of stuff. And I was blessed to go into the NUIG students last year with that bag and help them understand where all their midwifery had come from. And I was delighted that they took so much interest in these women. I didn't think I would get, when you have young people, late teens, early 20s, but they were absolutely fascinated. I was just delighted to be part of it with them. So hopefully it'll be an ongoing thing to keep it going. But this lady anyway, I went down and they gave me the bag and went through everything, scanned everything and sorted it all out. But she was another fantastic lady, married and moved to Ballinasloe, which is now the hospital is there now, but she was the community midwife there. So I've just one little thing. I wrote a little poem for these women. I'm not really a poet, but I just felt they needed some little thing to recognise them and their work. And I'll just read it out for you now, if that's all right. So, An Banglúine. An Banglúine, the women of the knee, every birthing mother who was overjoyed to see. Her kindness seeked by mothers from all around, for the strength she gives, often without a sound. From each mother's God-given primal roar that echoed loudly throughout their home, nervousness relief on everyone's face when a healthy baby receives its mother's embrace. A house full of faces with joyful tears, the family celebrations would begin, for there's no greater feeling heard with that first cry or two, and in hope there isn't a twin. Struggles with poverty and hardship knitted into the fibre of every wall, lit only by small candlelight and warmed with flickers of coal. No pain relief or support they seeked, a profession often alone, carrying a burden both joy and grief, to most of us unknown. Listening to a mother's cries, heartbroken and all forlorn, grieving and crying for a child back then, the old travelling tongue called dead born. Poverty it stank everywhere, babies wrapped in rags for warmth. Another mouth to feed, the mother said, as her children's faces looked on. Night or day, come what may, in sun, rain, wind or snow, there was nothing that would ever stop Banglúine to the women she would go. Sacrificing their own loved ones at home to save these women's lives, their trust was held in high regard, like an angel sent to guide. For the old Banglúine may have disappeared and gone, the time-old tradition of birthing still carries on. Now transferred to maternity wards with a medical device, but the gift still remains in the hands and knees of our magical midwife. So this bag is 125 years old, and this was Mary Ann Fanning's bag, who's behind me here on the little poster. And Mary Ann was born in 1880 in Skerries in County Dublin. And she became a midwife, and her first post was in Kerry in 1898. She got a post back home where she lived in Garristown, County Dublin, and moved into the dispensary there. She got married and even had a letter asking permission to keep her position to the chairman of the board for her position as a midwife in Garristown. So she was a mother of, I think, 7 children, I could be 8, but she was actively involved with the 1916 Rising, rendering medical aid to the volunteers at the Thomas Ashe Raid in Ashbourne in County Meath. So thankfully her family have kept this little bag, and a photograph of her. One here behind me that was taken in 1910, and they said she's roughly 30 years of age in it, in her midwifery uniform. And some of these are just a few of the items that's in the bag, and a lot of which that is very similar to today. So this is a pinard, which now they have electronic, but they still encourage the student midwives to use these to listen to the baby's heartbeat in the womb. We've pulse and temperature charts. I have a delivery set, a forceps, some of these medicines that's still used today to stop bleeding. This would have been like an enema, trying to keep out, get the woman all cleaned up before the delivery. And even carbolic soap. Some of these here now is little syringes and bits and pieces. They are very delicate and very old. There is a few more bits and pieces inside, but we're hopefully, if everything goes well, we're going to have it as a project in the National Museum next year.
So sewing is part of it, and it's mainly to encourage people to use their hands to see that these beautiful machines still work wonderfully. And today we often just use an electric machine, find out that we can't use them and throw them away, and yeah, but these still anybody can sew on them. They're very well built, they were incredibly expensive at their times, and the women in the house, they were lucky when they had a machine like this. It was, yeah, they would have paid off like we pay off for cars now. They paid off for years and years, the machines, and yeah, they were just a big part in the house. Everything got done on them. They sewed curtains, clothes, whatever. And today we just don't do this anymore, and we should do more of this again. This is what I really like. It's just a hand crank, and you turn it, and it makes this beautiful noise. You can use it anywhere. That's the other beauty of it. It's more therapeutic. It's not as stressful as an electric one that I couldn't use anyway because it just would muddle up. But you can bring it out in the garden and you sew at your own speed. This is like an extension, or the needle is like an extension to your arm, and it just stops when you stop.